Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the September meeting of the Wilmot Township Committee of Adjustment. I would like to introduce the members of our committee this evening. We have with us in no particular order, Mr. Steve Miller, Mr. Tyler Bowman, Ms. Louise Lalonde, and Mr. Peter Rowe, and my name is Wayne Roth. Also with us, we have Mr. Andrew Martin, who is the Chief Planner for the Township of Wilmot, the Economic Development Officer, and as well as our Secretary Treasurer for this committee. And with us too is Mr. Cameron Miller, who is the Township Planner and will be assisting us in some of these applications. And of course, Carl Jeffries is our host this evening. We are I don't believe there has been anyone registered to read the land acknowledgement declaration. So I guess I will do it then. We have gathered in Wilmot Township on the traditional territory of the Neutral, the Anishinaabe, and the Haudenosaunee, and the Mississauga peoples. We also want to acknowledge the importance of the Dish with One Spoon Covenant, a peace agreement made between Indigenous nations before the Europeans arrived. It characterizes our collective responsibility to each other and to Mother Earth. We should take only what we need, leave enough for others, and keep the dish clean. By acknowledging this covenant and the First Nations and the Métis and the Inuit peoples, we are reminded of our important connection to this land where we live, learn, and work together as a community. We are an independent body that has been appointed by Wilmot Township Council. We have the ability to make minor changes to existing zoning regulations and to approve some changes to existing non-conforming uses, as well as to give consent. Each applicant will be notified in writing of the decision of this committee within 10 days, and with that decision will be instructions on how it can be appealed. Any decision made by this committee can be appealed to the local planning appeal board, and they then will hold a meeting and make a final and binding decision. This process takes place both in consent applications and in minor variance applications. The format of the meeting this evening will be as follows. We will have either Mr. Miller or Mr. Martin introduce the application. The applicant will then be invited to come forward and add any additional comments if they choose to do so. Following this, anyone else in the audience will have the opportunity to speak for or against the application. Committee members may then have the opportunity to question the applicant and to make comments if they so desire. The committee will then make its decision. Tonight, are there any pecuniary interests under the Municipal Conflict of Interest Act? Seeing none, we can then proceed with our first application. Mr. Miller, would you please do that?
Thank you, Mr. Roth. The first application is A16/21 and concerns 41 Theodore Schuler Boulevard in New Hamburg. This application is proposing to reduce the rear yard setback of an unenclosed covered deck from 7.5 meters to approximately 2.7 meters. So the property is currently developed with a single detached dwelling and an attached garage. As it exists currently, the dwelling is fairly close to the minimum rear yard setback at 7.56 meters, whereas 7.5 meters is required. The applicant's proposing to construct a deck which only contains a covered roof structure with no walls attached to the rear of the house. Which, due to the fact that it's covered, it is subject to the same rear yard setback requirement as the house, again 7.5 meters. And the applicant's proposing a reduction to 2.7 meters. So given that the minimum rear yard setback for a detached accessory building, including a pergola or pavilion, something similar to the structure, is 0.6 meters, and that the deck is proposed to be covered with no walls, staff are of the opinion that the request is minor and is appropriate given the placement of the existing dwelling. There were no objections raised in circulating the application, and staff are recommending that the application be approved.
Thank you very much, Mr. Miller. Does the applicant wish to address committee on this matter? Mr. Martin, does anyone registered?
The applicant is in attendance. If they wish to speak, you can use the raise hand option at the bottom of the screen, and I see they have, so I will join them to the meeting here.
Okay. Hello? I don't see them here yet, Andrew. Oh, okay, here we go. Yes, you may go ahead.
Hi, thank you. Yeah, I don't have anything to add. Cameron did a great job of describing the situation, and just appreciate your attention to the matter.
Okay, thank you very much. Is there anyone else in the audience that wishes to comment on this application? Seeing none, I'll turn it over to members of committee. Any comments or questions from any committee member? Seeing none, I would then ask for a motion to approve this application, moved by Ms. Lalonde, seconded by Mr. Rowe. Is there any discussion on the motion? If not, all in favor? That motion is carried. Thank you very much. Mr. Miller, would you introduce the next application?
Thank you, Mr. Roth. The next application is A17/21 and concerns 1153 Bender Road. So this application is proposing to reduce the front yard setback of an accessory building from 10 meters to approximately 3 meters, and to increase the maximum allowable height from 4.5 meters to approximately 5.5 meters. So again, the property is currently developed with a single detached dwelling that fronts onto Oxford Road 5, and driveway access is provided off Bender Road. The applicant's proposing this detached building parallel to the driveway, and due to the location of the house and the septic system, combined with the exterior side yard setback requirements off Oxford Road 5, the building cannot realistically be located elsewhere on the property. The applicant's also proposing an increase in the maximum height, again from 4.5 meters to 5.5 meters. This would allow the building to match the roof style of the house, and also to provide 12-foot ceilings for storage. Staff are of the opinion that a minor increase in height, as well as a minor reduction in the setback, is appropriate and characteristic of other accessory buildings in the area. No objections were raised in circulating the application, and staff are recommending that the application be approved.
Thank you very much, Mr. Miller. Does the applicant wish to make any comments on this application?
I see the applicant is in attendance. If they wish to speak, they can raise their hand at this point at the bottom of the screen. I see that they have raised their hand. I'll join them to the meeting here.
Okay, thank you. Yes, certainly, sir. Go ahead. Mr. Brenner, are you with us?
You just need to unmute yourself, which you should be able to do by hovering over your own picture and clicking.
Oh, it's gone.
Well, there we go.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay, I just want to say thanks to Cameron for guiding me through the process, and I have no concerns.
Okay, thank you very much. Is there anyone else in the audience that wishes to comment on this application? Seeing none, I'll open it to members of committee. Any comments or questions regarding this application? Seeing none, I would ask someone then to bring forth a motion to approve this application, moved by Mr. Bowman, seconded by Mr. Miller. Is there any discussion on the motion? If not, all in favor? That motion is carried. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Can we proceed then to the next application?
Thank you. The next applications, actually, there are two of them that we would deal with at the same time. Minor variance A1821 and consent application B921, both dealing with 30 Marvin Street in New Hamburg. The minor variance application proposes a reduction in the lot width from a required 22.5 meters to 18.5 meters. And the consent application proposes to divide the current industrially zoned property into 2 parcels. The retained parcel would continue to house the Clausen Bronze operation, and the severed lot would be industrially zoned, the current proposal potentially being a car dealership operation. Circulation of the application provided a conceptual plan of what could in theory be facilitated on the property. However, the exact layout, configuration, and ultimately the proposed use could change based on the potential ownership of that parcel. The lands are currently industrially zoned. They allow for a range of uses from manufacturing to warehousing to car dealerships, among other uses that are permitted in the industrial zone. And the key component of this application is it isn't contemplating the land use of the property. Development of the vacant portion of this parcel can occur already through site plan control. And ultimately anything that were to be in compliance in terms of land use could already be constructed. So a car dealership being one of those, in theory, could be constructed on the parcel right now. So this application is essentially just looking at the separation of the lands that Clausen Bronze deemed to be surplus to their operations. Through circulation of the application, we did receive a number of comments from neighboring property owners. Those comments were provided to the committee and are attached to the report. And staff have responded to any of the concerns that were raised through a response email or phone call, and in general commented on within the report. The primary concerns are in this neighborhood are related to noise, to servicing, to traffic, and to lighting. And all of those factors are things that we're typically addressed through a site plan control process, and certainly would be doing so through a subsequent site plan control process. In this case, the proposed recommended conditions of consent include a requirement to secure an agreement to outline what would be required through that future site plan control process. So a traffic study to look at the cumulative impact from both this property and the retained lands, to look at noise based on what the actual development plan is for the parcel. So were it to be a car dealership, to look at that specific operations, if there were to be a car wash there, to look at the car wash, and basically look at any potential noise sources to ensure that the mitigation measures required to comply with provincial requirements for noise emissions are addressed through that future development. Stormwater management, this neighborhood has experienced water and drainage issues in the past, and certainly stormwater management is something that is considered through a site plan control process, and specifically would be addressed through this application, both with respect to the retained and severed parcel, to ensure that there are no impacts on the neighborhood, and to ensure existing and proposed infrastructure is sized accordingly to accommodate the stormwater needs for both parcels. And lastly, with respect to traffic, a traffic study is something that will be required to look at the trip generation from this parcel, as well as the proposed parcel, as well as the existing operations. It is not anticipated that this would change the operations of Clausen Bronze as it exists today. There are loading docks that have been the subject of some concern through the circulation of this application, but that loading dock that exists had approval in the 1980s for its location. So it's not anticipated that any of the current configuration or operations would change, but certainly looking at opportunities to improve the situation where possible through signage or directional signs to ensure that trucks and vehicles are directed towards Hamilton Road as opposed to through the residential neighborhood. So whether that be a limitation of turning movements exiting this proposed lot, signage to indicate no trucks, and those sorts of matters would be looked at through that traffic study. Ultimately, though, traffic is an enforcement matter. So if there is existing issues with parking in boulevards, parking on the street, and traffic and trucks blocking lanes, that isn't a factor of the application before us or the zoning bylaw, it's a factor of enforcement. So ultimately that would be the measure through both our Public Works Department with respect to ensuring that the roads are designed accordingly, and then ultimately enforcement to deal with trucks or vehicles traveling in areas where they're not allowed to be traveling. So the long and short of what I'm trying to say here is that this application, we certainly recognize the concerns that have been raised. And ultimately, those are factors that we already consider through a site plan control process, certainly have noted them. And the proposed conditions of approval implement those studies to ensure that development can be compatible in this location, recognizing that the zoning already allows for that land use. The last comment I might make just then too is just with respect to the existing operations. There was some comment that that the parcel should be required to be brought into current compliance with zoning and other requirements of applicable bylaws. And staff would suggest that certainly any opportunity to better an existing situation will be taken. But there is no ability for us through this process to reverse approvals from the past. So for instance, the minor variance that was approved in the 80s to allow for the loading dock to be in its present location, which requires trucks to turn on the road, isn't something that can be changed through this process. Ultimately, the site has been designed to accommodate the required parking provisions of the bylaw. So there's ample room on the retained parcel to provide the number of required parking spaces that deal with the floor area of the existing building, as well as there's surplus lands around the building within the configuration of the proposed retained land to accommodate potentially expanded parking areas, outdoor storage areas, snow storage, and ultimately stormwater management as well. So those factors have been taken into account, and certainly there is the opportunity to be to fully comply if modifications were made to that building in the future, but also recognizing that existing situations dealing with loading docks are matters that exist today and aren't subject to this application. So staff are recommending that this application be approved. The conditions of approval, it was outlined in the report, implement the standards required to ensure that the lot can be developed in the future appropriately, and ultimately to ensure compatibility of development. We'll leave it at that, and if there are any questions, I can certainly answer them. I do see that there are a number of people that have registered to speak. I see some hands being raised. The applicant is here, or the applicant's representative, perhaps be the first person, and then
Yes.
maybe we could take, I see people raising hands, and we'll add individuals as the last person as the last person speaks.
Thank you very much, Mr. Martin. As I'm sure that all committee members are well aware of the fact that this committee has only the authority to deal with the consent. We do not have the authority or the opportunity to deal with site control measures. That's handled in a completely different process. So just to make sure that we're all, reading from the same page. And then when you're dealing with consents, you deal with it in a historical sense as to whether have we done this historically in the past, and does it make from a consent point of view, does it fall within the parameters? So anyway, thank you for allowing me to have the little preamble. Does the applicant wish to address committee on this matter?
Yes, they'll be joining the meeting here momentarily.
Good.
I'm sorry, I believe I was muted. I apologize.
No, okay, you're with us now, so thank you. Go ahead.
Thank you, Chair Roth, members of committee, city staff, and ladies and gentlemen. My name is Victor Labreche, Associate Director, Planning Lead of the IBI Group Waterloo Office. Thank you for your considerations of this application this evening. Has been pointed out by Andrew Martin, the site itself is sort of pre-zoned for a significant amount of time. The Class and Bronze business has been an establishment for well over 30 years. This site and business existed prior to the surrounding neighborhood community to the north. We took a considerable amount of time in configuring both the potential severed parcel and the retained parcel to ensure proper access and controlled access, which at a point directly at the end of Marvin Street before it turns left to the north. So we believe that that location and the proposed access and shared easement really compartmentalizes, if you will, the access and loading in the best possible spot. Recognizing again that this property and a large amount of the surrounding area to the west and across the highway has historically been industrial, and again, before the surrounding community established. The surplus land in itself, obviously, as it's been that way for 30 years, has been deemed by Class and Bronze as surplus, not needed for their operations. But again, as Andrew Martin indicated, we did spend a considerable amount of time before we brought this forward, even in a pre-consultation with Township staff, to ensure that there was potential room for further parking, loading, and to allow tractor trailer to properly turn within the back and of Class and Bronze building, and also into the severed parcel. So we did sort of an abridged traffic access study using a program that's well known in the industry as AutoTurn, to make sure that we had proper turning radiuses that could be accommodated, even with further expanded parking along the highway. There is a separation, as you know, of township-owned land along the highway that's shown on the proposed severance plan and concept plan, as well as to the immediate west side of the property itself. The concept plan was requested of us just prior to submission, or together with the submission, to give an illustrative showing and comfort, if you will, to show how the site could be developed with required parking, access, with uses that are already permitted. Again, as of right, permitted uses on this site. It was also noted earlier by Mr. Martin that the consent application here, I mean, I would liken it or describe it as sort of a technical consent, because any future land use is permitted, as well as we could do some sort of development like this without the consent application, because again, the property allows all these things, subject, of course, to site plan control. Class and Bronze in themselves as a company are not in land development, nor have interest to expand, and again, has been deemed surplus. And I know full well, as being a planner in this region for well over 35 years, that site plan control has become, an arduous process and very technical and detailed, with many studies required to support it, some of which Mr. Martin had pointed out, which would be subject to a future application when development comes forward. So that's sort of a general overview. I would also note that if there's some questions of this committee or the public that I may not be able to answer, I was remiss to note at the beginning that we do have Jeff Weitzel available from Class and Bronze, Wayne Farhood from Farhood Professional Corporation Solicitor, as well as Jordan Gregory. If there's some operational or legal type questions, but otherwise I'd be happy to answer your questions as we go along. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, sir. I would remind committee that we have to be rather careful in staying within the parameters of the authority of this committee. Just a gentle reminder. Okay, thank you. Now, obviously there are other folks who want to address committee on this matter, so I'm going to turn it over to Mr. Martin to control that and bring each person forward. And of course, we already have their names and addresses, but it would be it would be good to make sure that we know who we're speaking with at the time. Okay, Mr. Martin?
May I ask just a brief question, or am I out of, is this,
Okay. Oh, yeah.
am I in the
Okay.
wrong
Mr.
time?
Bowman, go ahead, certainly.
Sorry. Just a point of clarification. Our minor variance is on the retained land, is that correct? The narrower parcel?
It's actually, sorry, it's actually on the severed parcel. is what-
Severed parcel.
yeah.
Okay, I just didn't see the dimensions on there.
Yeah.
And then just to clarify, and Andrew, you may be able to help as well. When we're the retained parcel is of size, what I'm hearing that you can manage stormwater, snow storage. We're not. We're still meeting current code bylaws as we're able to on that retained land.
Correct.
With the
Re-
exception of previously built agreements, I guess.
Yeah, so the retained parcel complies with all the requirements of the zoning bylaw. And
Gotcha.
one of the
Okay.
provisions in the conditions of approval is to ensure that a stormwater management strategy considers both parcels. So
Gotcha. Yeah.
if there were to be an issue with size, then a joint servicing
Agreement
solution
put in place.
would need to be looked at through that process.
Okay, no, that's fair. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Are there any technical questions of Mr. LaBreche at this point from members of committee? I don't see any, so then we'll move on, Mr. Martin.
Yes, so the first registered attendee that will join is Calla Spencer, and I will join her now.
Yes, good evening.
Good evening. Sorry, my light there is pretty obnoxious, isn't it? So I'll turn a little bit. So
That-
it's
that-
a little better.
That's good.
Good
Go
evening,
ahead.
members of the committee. Thank you for letting me speak. My name is Calla Spencer. I live on Maurice Street, which is just up the street from Costco and the severed parcel. I wanted to speak tonight for a few reasons, but also I wanted to say that I do want the committee to understand that there are a number of people in our area that this format just doesn't work for. And Andrew, thank you for helping me with one of the members of our community with the phone. Even still with phone, I know people are not comfortable even with that, like the *9 *6. So I think you do have a lot of people who are interested in talking tonight. I think you would have had a lot more if we were able to have a face-to-face, because it is something that is important for residents of this community to have their voices heard. So you'll probably hear a lot of the same moving forward, that I do share the sentiments for many of my neighbors on this application. I have a few questions first, if that's fine. The proposed car dealership, when you sever, they will be taking up a portion along the Highway 78. Andrew, you had mentioned that the side setback will be 6 meters from where the property line goes in towards Class and Bronze and Class and Bronze building. Because the car dealership will now own along 7-8, does that not mean that the front yard setback will not shift to Marvin Street?
The front yard setback is actually where the proposed shared access is, as it's the narrowest frontage. So by definition, the frontage on a street that is the smallest becomes the front yard. So that's why this minor variance application is dealing with that proposed area of shared access.
Okay. So I do understand that the town has made it very clear that the use of the site nor the potential site application is what is in question tonight. But one of the biggest challenges that I will stick to the severance only is that being a resident of this community, a lot of people here have talked about the fact that we do not feel Class and Bronze can adequately contain its business operations to its own physical site. We've had a lot of issues that the streets here have faced. And again, we have a demographic of people who were not comfortable with Zoom or the phone who may not be speaking tonight. I hope there are a few that are. But truck traffic is using a public roadway to turn around. That minor variance that was granted in 1983 to have the loading dock there. Back in 1983, truck sizes were not the same. We are seeing truck sizes now be 53 feet. So a truck and trailer is pulling in to try to access that loading dock. And as a result, we're having very large challenges in this neighborhood. One being the fact that they are driving over residents' lawns. And again, those residents are of an older demographic, so they may not be speaking tonight. But there has been damage to those lawns, which they have tried to contact the town to figure out a solution for. Trucks are coming down Good Street because we have drivers who are not knowing that they have to turn so quickly onto Marvin, and they're coming down a residential side street when we have children on bikes on roads. We have them blocking that public roadway. They're blocking Marvin to be able to do a 3-point, 4-point, or 5-point turn to turn into that loading dock, which then is blocking traffic. And more importantly, is causing a massive issue for any pedestrians walking by. I've almost been hit walking my baby in a stroller. And we've also had cars that are not being noticed when the truck is trying to back up onto the street. When they have to open and close truck doors, we are seeing the truck drivers pull forward, park on the street, park their cabs out on the street to then go back and close the doors. We are also finding that parking is inadequate. So parking seems to be happening on that boulevard where grass is completely worn away. We have seen cars that are parked far too close to a fire hydrant. We're seeing gravel being washed out. We're seeing that corner being not very good for cars in the wintertime because of the damage that's being done to the roadway, and it has not been fixed by the town. We're also knowing that there is no sidewalks there. When I contacted the town to say, are we getting sidewalks? They're telling us it's a 10-year time frame. But as a result, we're told to use the boulevards, but there is no boulevard because the staff are parking on that boulevard. We're also noticing that there has been sea containers in their front yard, which has, as a result, taken away parking spaces, which while parking is happening on that boulevard. And those sea containers for so long should be considered a permanent installation. I do understand that members of the town staff have indicated that the building was constructed prior to site plan application being required, that minor variances were given for that loading zone in 1983. I have myself friends who are planners. I've also contacted a lawyer as well as a senior planning official who has said that when you do sever a parcel, that site plan should be looked at for the existing. My biggest thing is that when a business cannot contain its operations on its own property, that they shouldn't be severing land that they could adequately use to maintain their own business. So when you are talking about the fact that we have a severed parcel that can adequately contain a transport truck to go in, turn around within the 4 points of its property, which is standard practice today, and you also can contain staff parking, you can put sea containers there with no issues at all to the surrounding residents, then that land to us should not be severed when it can be used to adequately do their business. In addition to that, there's a lot of other issues that I know you have mentioned that will be rectified. I think one of the reasons why you'll see a lot of residents on this meeting is because in my experience, when I am from other municipalities, when there is a site application done, there's typically a public meeting just to be kind to the residents around them. We have been very clearly told that this is a public meeting for the variance and the severance, but there will be no public meeting should a site plan application go forward. So I think you're going to be hearing a lot of people wanting to be on this call and upset about not having the opportunity for understanding more about a noise study, a traffic study, a lighting study, the impacts that it will cause to our surrounding community. And I know you guys don't want to address it. I'll say it quickly. Yes, we do think there are going to be lighting issues. We do have requests as a community that lighting issues are considered. A lighting study will be done, but there's definitely certain types of lights that we would like to see in the community to ensure that it does not impact residents around us. Noise issues definitely is a very large concern because we already know that we have noise issues in Baden. We have neighbors here that used to live near the car wash in Baden who have stated that you could hear them 6 blocks away at midnight, somebody washing their car. So it's definitely a concern for an older neighborhood that not everybody has air conditioning. A lot of people keep their windows open in the summertime, and that noise is going to be a very large factor for us. The biggest reason why I wanted to talk tonight about this is because traffic issues are a very big thing, not only with the existing property that is there with the trucks, pedestrians, children, but Marvin and going out of Marvin onto Hamilton is an utter nightmare. Hamilton Road is also a nightmare, which I have tried contacting the town about. We have no safe crossing still there. There's no safe crossing to access Highway 78 at the bottom of Marvin. We've had numerous very near misses with neighbors here. We're actually no longer, trying to go out that way at times because you can very easily be hit trying to go out the bottom of Marvin because people are flying around a corner and nothing is there to stop them from doing that. So when we're talking about adding another industrial business there, whether it be a car dealership or anybody else, we're looking at increasing traffic. And I can tell you that I did do my research, and I do know that adding a car dealership specifically will increase traffic a lot. And that traffic, you can put a no right-hand turn sign there, but we have no right-hand turn signs, coming out of businesses around us, and everybody ignores them. When we talk about enforcement, who's going to enforce that? Nobody's going to sit there. We don't have a police presence to do that. So there's definitely a lot of challenges that a lot of people would like to see. Water and sewages, we do definitely have an issue. When we talk about people have had issues in this community, I think it's important to note that it's not just issues. We have had multiple people on the street have their basements flooded 3 times each because of sewage issues. We also have issues down at the bottom of Marvin where houses were allowed to be built. And those houses are also having major sewage issues as well. For me, this area was started with Class and Bronze, and I have the utmost respect for that. But this area was developed by the town and with town permission after that to put residences in. So now we are primarily a residential neighborhood. So if a severance is going to be allowed, at the very minimum, we need to be able to see that all business operations need to be contained on that property to ensure that our residential streets and surrounding houses and residents around them are kept safe. Thank you.
Thank you very much. You have submitted a very professional presentation, and I'm sure Township staff will be able to use that in their deliberations when it comes to site plan control. So I thank you for your participation. Mr. Martin? Do we have the next?
Yeah, I just don't know if you maybe want to ask the committee whether there's any questions while we have the delegation
okay.
here.
Are there any questions by committee members of the delegation? Seeing none, we will move forward with the next participant.
All right, the next participant is Howard Otto, and I will join him now. So Mr. Otto is joining us by phone.
Okay.
And there he goes. He is unmuted now. So.
Yes, I have a lot of concerns. One is surface water. There's a lot of surface water comes down Hamilton, down Marvin, good in Morris Street, goes with down the swale to the 7 and 8. There's a lot of water, and I've asked council, including you, Mr. Roth, to come in a major storm to observe, and I get no response. And the lay of the land of the new leans that way, my way. If you put a big parking lot in, it's going to be a lot more surface water. The drainage on 7 and 8 is not good. We looked at it the other day. The box culvert in front of Claus and Bronze is 3/4 full. That should be drained and should be ditched, and the box culvert cleaned out. And you say you're going to use signage. Well, that's a joke, because if you sit at Tim Hortons parking lot, the signage of no left turn and do not enter, you sit there for an hour in the afternoon having coffee. There's about 4 or 5 vehicles that use it, and they don't obey it, and nobody enforces it, including township and police. They don't have time to enforce it. So I just wonder, when you say signage, who's going to enforce it? Nobody seems time to do it. And a lot more traffic as stated. And I've almost got hit with that going out there several times. As Kayla already mentioned, traffic making right-hand turns onto Hamilton Street. They got the pedal to the metal, and then they increase in speed going Hamilton Road. So you got a lot of concerns there to look at, and that's why I don't want it. And plus, I hope there's privacy walls. If it does go ahead, privacy walls get installed. That's all I have to say.
Okay, thank you very much, Mr. Otto. Does any committee member have a question of Mr. Otto? Seeing none, we'll move to the next delegation.
So I have Donald Laurie here. I will join him now.
Hello?
Yes, you're with us now. Go ahead,
Okay.
sir.
I wasn't sure of that. Okay. Good evening, members of the Committee of Adjustment, Wilmot staff and neighbors. I have read with interest the comments attached to the staff report concerning the consent and minor variance. There was a similar theme running through all the submissions highlighting concerns with the business operation and proposed severance. Why are we only entering this process now, where it now appears that the committee's hands are tied? As Clausen Bronze did not appear to be able to contain all of its operation on its own lot, are they willing to remedy the situation and submit a site plan agreement? As they are aware of the shortfalls and the situation of the traffic, why have they not proceeded to start making a change now and leaving it as is? I'm concerned that if the severance is granted now, there will not be enough retained land to accommodate truck traffic, parking spaces, outside storage, garbage bins, etc. Regulations do not allow certain items to be located in the front yard as the case is now, but restricted to the side and rear yards. The Good Street, Marvin Street, and Marie Street truck turnaround must stop. This is a roadway, not a freight yard. Some drivers require multiple attempts and block the intersection. The municipality has an obligation to make sure that the roads are safe. This clearly is a safety issue and should be addressed. I note that all studies relating to traffic, parking, noise, etc. are part of future events. Where does the impact of the residential neighborhood come in? An industrial zone locked within a residential zone is not compatible. Why is the driveway for the proposed severance lot dumping all of its traffic onto the residential street? How much traffic will go past Mr. Otto's front door? Every vehicle that enters has to leave the same way, doubling the traffic count. Could a road similar to the John Bear property be possible at backdoor approach? This may not be the right forum to address some issues, but it puts on record various concerns relative to the application. I believe this issue is beyond the scope of the committee. Township council should consider the issue through the zoning change process. Because of traffic safety issues and the ingress and egress of the proposed land is confined strictly to a residential zone roadway, I strongly urge the committee to deny this application. And I would like to receive written notification of this decision. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much for your input. Any questions of the delegation by members of committee? Seeing none, Mr. Martin.
Sorry.
Oh, I'm sorry, Mr. Miller.
Sorry, quick question for Andrew. The gentleman there, Donald Laurie, mentioned that in his opinion, and I want to get this right, should be addressed by a zone change process through Township Council. Can you comment on the feasibility or applicability of that?
Sure. So the zoning is already industrially zoned, so there is no zoning process. I think that the suggestion that was being raised is to the east of this land, there's an industrial subdivision that has been approved, draft plan of subdivision. So I believe the suggestion was perhaps there would be a way to combine access through that industrial subdivision. And we did have that. I had a conversation with a couple of residents about that. And essentially, there isn't the opportunity to force that to occur. It's privately owned land. So there's no municipal ownership of that parcel at this point to require that sort of access. And essentially is outside the scope of this application, certainly, but there isn't an avenue that would require this application to go to council because it is in compliance with the zoning bylaw in terms of land use. And essentially the variance to deal with the width is a technicality of the bylaw dealing with where the property has frontage. There's other ways for that. If defined differently in the zoning, what is the front yard versus a flankage yard, compliance could be achieved. So it's not a question of whether this configuration really meets the intent of the zoning or not. So long story short, there's no avenue for this to go to council.
Did you have another question, Mr. Miller? No.
I think the main point is that this proposal dumps a great deal of traffic into a residential zone. How can this happen in a planning process where residential, industrial should be all separated? Is it not time now to make things right? Should this lot not be severed and served into residential in keeping with the rectangular shape of the community? There's lots of land out towards Nafasiga Road for development, and I was wondering why these applications haven't been directed towards using that land. You have to get started building in there sometime. It might as well be now. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much for your comment. Mr. Martin, we'll move on to the next delegation.
So I see two of the delegations that have spoken already have their hands raised.
Now, normally our procedural bylaw has stated that you only can speak once to the question. I will give some latitude in this particular case and allow people to have a second crack at it, but that would be it. I don't think we can stretch it out to 3 or 4. So, and I would ask the delegations in their secondary question to be as brief and succinct as possible. So, Mr. Martin, if you wish, as chair, I will make the ruling subject to committee's approval that we will allow these 2 people to readdress committee. Committee agree with that? Yes, okay. Mr. Martin, now do you want to handle the 2 people first, or should we go through the list to give everybody a first shot at it and then take the secondary questions? Which would be your preference?
I don't see any of their hands raised other than individuals that have spoken already.
Okay, well then that solves that problem. So let's do that then.
Okay, so Mr. Otto has his hand raised and I will allow him. Mr. Otto, if you wish to speak, if you could just unmute yourself, or if you've raised your hand by accident, if you could just unmute yourself and let us know that way, that would be great.
Maybe he didn't disconnect the first time around.
I didn't see his hand go down, to be honest.
Okay.
After his first.
Mr. Bowman? Do you have a question, Mr. Bowman? No, okay.
No, Mr. Bowman was just indicating he didn't think he saw his hand go down after he spoke the first time, so.
Okay, well, let's go to the second speaker, please.
Right, Carla Spencer is asked to speak, and I will join her now.
I
Go
just had
ahead. Go ahead,
I
Spencer.
just had a question. It was stated that when residents had asked if the what is being called employment lands for the 41 industrial and light industrial units behind to the east of Morey Street, if that was an opportunity to connect through there instead of going out into a residential area. Sorry, Andrew, you had mentioned that it's not existing right now, so it's not an opportunity. It's also privately owned land. However, if the potential owner of this new severed property were to go to those privately owned lands and ask for access, is that not something that would be permitted? And could they not propose a site plan application that would allow for a driveway entrance and exit to go off of employment lands, which to us would be much more suitable coming in and out of an industrial area versus a residential street?
So certainly there is an opportunity subsequently for that negotiation to occur, but I think the key is it's not tied. We can't tie this application to what may or may not be able to happen. Certainly designing the site to allow for that future flexibility, and if there were to be an opportunity, I would suggest that there's certainly no concern with that as keeping that door open, but to require this, knowing that this property can already be developed for industrial purposes, it would not be something that we could tie to this application specifically. But I would suggest that certainly those comments are being heard by the owner of the property and consultants. And certainly if there's an opportunity to look at that discussion through a subsequent process, there could be an opportunity to engage in that discussion.
So essentially, the only way that a severance can happen now is off of an existing roadway, and it can't be shown any other way because that roadway on employment lands is not existing today.
The draft plan of subdivision that's been approved for that in the lands east doesn't have a street connecting in the location of this parcel. So it would require some reconfiguration of that plan. Whether it's an opportunity to do that or not is certainly a discussion that can happen. It's outside the scope of this application. But again, it's not to say that discussion can't happen, that a site plan couldn't look at that opportunity and ultimately, if that's a solution that could be achieved, then that would be something could be looked at as well.
And obviously this is a side question, but if that were the case down the road and it could be looked at and it did happen, then the site plan could be altered to close off an entrance and exit off of Marvin Street.
Correct. That would certainly be, I would say, if there was an opportunity to gain access in a different location, then there would be the opportunity. It would be through negotiations with the property owner and looking at the street design and those sorts of things to ensure that alternative access meets all the needs for that property. But again, any of those discussions are certainly a possibility.
Okay. And how would residents contact you guys? If obviously this would have to be a separate discussion, how can residents contact you to have that discussion moving forward?
Well, I would suggest the discussion wouldn't be with the township at this point. The discussion could certainly be with the owners of the property to see if they're willing to have that discussion with the adjacent developer. And should there be an appetite to look at that, the township could facilitate a process that could implement that. But it's certainly, we're probably heading down a road kind of outside the scope of what we're dealing with here. And but should there be an opportunity to look at that, then if parties are willing, there is an opportunity to then engage with the township.
And a traffic study could ultimately determine that this might not be a suitable location and also push an entrance and exit over there as well, if that were an opportunity.
Well, I think a traffic study is complete. It has to look at the roads that are available. So it wouldn't be able to suggest entrance on a property that doesn't exist.
But a traffic study could indicate that Marvin Street is not an adequate location for a business of that kind or a traffic volume of that kind.
Well, typically a traffic study is going to look at proposed and permitted land uses. So given that the property already has the potential to have this land use there, to suggest that it doesn't have right of access to the street would be outside the scope of a traffic study. The traffic study would certainly look at what mitigation measures need to be implemented to to facilitate proper access and when looking at trip generation. Also, part of it would look at long-term plans for any improvements. So as you suggested within the 10-year capital, the improvements to this street, including installation of sidewalks, is certainly something that's being contemplated. I'm not saying it's 10 years out, it's within the 10-year forecast. So that would be a discussion, our Public Works and Engineering Department ultimately would be engaged in that traffic consultation process, and certainly could speak to through that process with those consultants to look at what proposed infrastructure improvements are planned for the street, and then ultimately looking at what solutions are there to minimize impact. But to suggest that a traffic study would then say that you can't have access, I wouldn't. The outcome wouldn't be that, because of its the zoning already allows for that land use on that property.
It's a bit concerning for us because the zoning was zoned when Class and Bronze was built, and when Class and Bronze was built, there was no residential homes around Class and Bronze. So when we're talking about the fact that the lot already allows for it, the lot allowed for it because it was zoned 50 years ago when Class and Bronze was built. However, the town has effectively allowed this area to be built majority residential now, surrounding one industrial location. So I understand the traffic study won't stop that, because that's how a traffic study operates. But at the same time, realistically, we could have a volume of traffic that could make it unsafe for residents and unsafe for vehicle traffic there, especially when that intersection already is extremely dangerous. With sidewalks not being there for 10 years, I already thought that was ridiculous. If we're talking about tripling or quadrupling traffic with a proposed car dealership, and I think it also should be mentioned that we're not just talking a car dealership, we're talking about car wash and vacuums as well. People are going to be dropping off their cars and walking into Tim Hortons or walking to McDonald's. We're going to have pedestrian traffic on that street. I certainly would hope that if something goes in there, that the development charges that they will be paying to the town, which would be fairly significant, would also include proper installation of sidewalks in the neighborhood to allow for pedestrians to travel safely all the way out to 7-8. There's already a curb there. There's no way to access it. So anyway, yeah. Thank you.
If I may make a comment based on my past life, sidewalks in that area were discussed, I believe, about 15, 18 years ago, and at the request of the property owners, they did not want a sidewalk in front of along their property because of the maintenance issue. So, Township.
We also though have the other side of the street, which is a church, which could easily also host a sidewalk. And we already know that we've been told that the far side of Good Street and the far side of Maurice Street are to have sidewalks. So if the far side of Good Street is to have a sidewalk, it can actually travel all the way down the side of Good Street and along the church, all the way out, and then across down the side of Hamilton on the east side to 7-8, where there are already crosswalks installed. We have people who are in wheelchairs and who are not able to walk, who can't get access to those areas. So we do know it's an issue for our area and an increasing one, especially if something like this is added.
I certainly agree with you, but that's a problem for present council to resolve. It's beyond the scope, unfortunately, of this committee. So, Mr. Andrew, are there any other people in the queue list?
I see Mr. Labreche has asked to speak again.
Okay, sir, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I think I was remiss in indicating after I finished speaking, if there was any questions or comments raised from the neighborhood, I'd like an opportunity just to answer it from a technical point of view. I think Ms. Spencer respectfully has asked a lot of questions that are leading questions and presuming certain things could be done or should have been looked at. I assume, as she mentioned, she lives on Maurice Street, and I trust that when she moved into this neighborhood, she saw there was vacant parcel, more than half vacant of the Class and Bronze property. And she mentioned that she knows planners, etc. I assume that she checked into the official plan designation and zoning of this area. She referred to the Class and Bronze property as the only industrial property in the area, recognizing that it's not. There's significant industrial area to the west side of Hamilton Street and on the other side of the highway. I also assume that when moving into this neighborhood, the noise of the provincial highway was evident. I would suggest that I know noise studies have been given anecdotal evidence on noise over the years at the OMB. Noise starts with what the background ambient level of noise is already. And I would suggest that that's pretty high in this area and in the neighborhood already. Certainly a noise study would be required in the future if the vacant lands are developed at what point in time and what the land use is. The noise study would get into great detail in terms of mitigating it to the level below what the ambient is. That's the test, or the surrounding background noise is already. The car wash, is something that seems to be part and parcel to car dealerships these days, but not always. I would also note that a car wash is a significant factor in the noise study, and it is often recommended, and you see them these days where you drive in, the doors shut on either side, and the operations begin. When it's done, the doors open. There's ways of positioning them, and for example, the dryers would likely exit towards the highway, so the noise is away from the residential community. But again, we don't know. The car wash may or may not be part of an operation. A car dealership may ultimately not be part of the development of the property. It's just dealing with the technical severance at this point. I would lastly say that the access that we are putting into our property is, again, the only best possible location for it. It's a 300-foot drive, a very short drive from the proposed access to Hamilton Street. And as I think mentioned earlier, signage and traffic controls will be put in place at the time of site plan control. For example, no right turn into Marvin or into Good Street, and that becomes an enforcement matter, and that signage could occur easily at that time. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. No further delegations, Mr. Martin?
I'm not seeing any.
Okay, thank you very much. So I'll turn it over to members of committee. Any comments or questions? Seeing none. The recommendation in front of you is that we approve. I guess, Mr. Martin, can we do both at the same time, or do we have to split them?
No, it's fine too.
I think we can do both.
Yeah, the recommendations are split up separately, but it can be one motion. Yeah.
We'll do it with one motion. Yes. Okay. Thank you. Okay, members of committee, I am looking for someone to bring forth a motion as is stated in the report. Someone going to bring forth that motion? Moved by Ms. Lalonde, seconded by Mr. Miller. Is there any discussion on the motion? All in favor of both motions? That motion is carried. Thank you. Thank you for all of the participants for this evening's meeting. We appreciate your input, and I think that that input has been very valuable, and I'm sure that the township planning staff has all of these, some of these presentations were very, very good and very detailed and will be of some great help. So I appreciate that. We need to pass the minutes of our last meeting. Would someone bring forth a motion to approve?
Just one more application first, yeah.
Oh, I'm sorry. Yes, we've got one more a severance application. Sorry about that. Mr. Martin, would you or Mr. Miller, you're doing this one, correct?
That's correct. Thank you, Mr. Roth. Yeah, the last application is also a consent application. B10/21 is concerning 194 Arnold Street in New Hamburg. And again, this application is proposing to sever a vacant portion of the property, consisting a little over 1,200 square meters of an existing industrial lot, while retaining the developed portion of the property, which is approximately 1,300 square meters. So the subject property contains an industrial building which is located on the west side of the property, while the eastern portion of the property is vacant. As shown on the attached sketch, again, the applicant's proposing to sever that vacant portion, which has been deemed surplus to the needs of the existing industrial operation. The sketch attached to the report again is a development concept. Should the application be approved, modifications to the original development concept may occur as a result of the future site plan control process and building permit process, which were just recently discussed in length. And conditions have been added to the consent to address the requirements from the Region of Waterloo with respect to a noise study and to address existing stormwater infrastructure on the property. So at the time of writing this report, no concerns were received, and staff are recommending approval of consent.
Thank you very much, Mr. Miller. Does the applicant wish to address the committee on this matter? Has the applicant registered?
No, I don't see anyone in attendance, and I don't see any hands raised.
Okay, so we can then dispense with that part. Okay, so members of committee, any comments or questions on the application? Seeing none, would someone bring forth a motion to approve as stated in the report? Moved by Mr. Rowe, seconded by Mr. Bowman. Any discussion on the motion? All in favor? That motion is carried. Thank you. Now we can move on to the minutes. Could someone bring forth approval of the minutes of our last meeting? Moved by Ms. Lalonde, seconded by Mr. Miller. Any discussion? All in favor? That is carried. Thank you all for participating this evening. And for October, are we looking at some applications, Mr. Miller?
Yeah, so far we have one confirmed. There should be one coming in tonight that we will look to process tomorrow, so that we can tentatively have a meeting October 6th if there are enough committee members that can attend that meeting.
How does that date suit, or is that date not good for you, Mr. Bowman?
No, I'm good. I agree with that.
Is everyone okay with that?
I'm good with that one.
Yeah, I'm good with that.
Okay, good. So then you can go ahead and confirm that.
Great.
Okay, thank you all for your participation this evening. Stay healthy and stay safe.